Hi, I'm Lou Prosperi. Thanks so much for coming to hear me talk about my book, The Imagineering Process. I hope you enjoy the talk. So I'm going to just start with a little bit about me and Southborough and why I'm speaking here. I live currently in Wakefield, but I grew up in Southborough. I grew up about 4/10 of a mile from here on Winchester Street. Went to the Walcott Kindergarten School that was on East Main Street. I went to the Margaret Neary Elementary School for the first 5 years from 1970 to 1975. I was the first grade class that went to that school. Then I attended Woodward Middle School, which it's a different building than it is now, but it's in the same physical location. And then I went to Algonquin Regional High School, graduated in the class of 1982. Then I went to the University of Lowell to study music composition. And we'll get back to that, but a little bit more about the library. I actually sort of have an interesting connection to the library. Having grown up in Southborough and liking to read, I came a lot. It's very different than it was when I was here. In fact, I took a walk around just to see if I remembered the way it used to be laid out, where Mrs. Curtin, the children's librarian, used to be. My sister worked here as a page for many years, so we would come and visit. And then I learned how to skip here. Mrs. Curtin, the child librarian, taught me how to skip in the children's room downstairs. So the place has an interesting connection, I guess. So I don't know how many other people can claim that. So a little bit more about me before we get to the book. So as I said, I attended the University of Lowell for music composition. While I was there, I also got into playing role-playing games. In addition to playing, I got to do some play testing, and that led me to actually becoming a freelance game designer for a period of time. And I eventually worked as a full-time game designer for a company called FASA Corporation on a fantasy role-playing game called Earth Dawn, which I don't expect anyone in the room has heard of, which is fine. That's all good. And then the company stopped production on my games, so I needed to get a new job, and I ended up getting a job as a technical writer. And then now I still work as a technical writer. I actually manage a team of technical writers and curriculum developers for a small business unit within Oracle, the very large software company. So the last thing about me that I want to talk about that sort of segues into why we're really here is that I love Disney World and I love Disney parks. And I hope you all do too. I suspect you've at least been to one, most of you. And so let's talk about Disney a little bit. So who has been to a Disney World, Disneyland, or China or France or? Never?
Not that I can remember.
Not the, okay, cool, that's good. And who's been more than once? So what is it you like about it? Anybody?
I think just the atmosphere of it is just really fun and just creative, and you can get so immersed, just like going on the rides and walking around. Like you enter the theme park and suddenly you're in this whole new world. I think that's the magic comes in.
I would agree 100%. Anybody else want to share? Sure.
Well, I really enjoy the design of them, like very heavily. That is just admiring every single detail, the process of making it, and the final product as a whole, and just seeing people enjoy the whole thing.
Well, I very much like you. I actually agree with both of you. Right? It's a very immersive experience. I remember the very first time I went was on my honeymoon, and just sort of seeing this type of storytelling and immersive experience was sort of eye-opening and mind-blowing and jaw-dropping all at once. It was sort of just kind of cool experience. And I became fascinated with Imagineering, which is the process by which that Walt Disney sort of coined the term for how they design and build these things. And when I get interested in things, I tend to buy books about them. I couldn't go to Disney World every year like some people. I mean, I went on my honeymoon, I went a couple years later. Then there was about 10 years before I went again. I've been about 9 or 10 times total, which I know for some people is a huge amount, but for some, I know a friend of mine online went 12 times in 2017. So relative, she went more times in 1 year than I've been in ever. So, but I think that speaks to what you were talking about, which is it's sort of this immersive, it really touches us in a different way. And I also think it depends on whether you go as an adult or a child and how it impacts you. So anyway, as I said, I tend to buy a lot of books and study books. I have probably close to 100 books about Imagineering and Disney parks, and I'll show you some of my collection. I brought a handful of books to show you pieces of my Imagineering library, mostly to focus on the ones that I really think help people understand what Imagineering is and how it all works. And so in reading these books and studying and going to the parks and watching videos online, I came to sort of develop this belief or theory that Imagineering would be a great model for the creative process in general. So yes, it's cool to build Space Mountain or Expedition Everest or Peter Pan's Flight or whatever, but also the principles and practices and process that they use could be transferred to other fields. And I had worked as a game designer, as I said, which is a creative field, quote, creative field. I've worked as an instructional designer and trainer. I work as a technical writer. And I believe that there's creativity in everything we do, or there can be creativity in everything we do. And one of the challenges to being creative and employing that creativity is looking for a model. And I think Imagineering is a great model for how creativity can work. And so that's sort of the genesis of this book, as well as the first. So we're here to talk about this book, The Imagineering Process. This is actually the second book in a series called The Imagineering Toolbox. The first one is this one, called The Imagineering Pyramid. Now this book explored 15 principles arranged in a pyramid that the Imagineers use in the design and construction of the parks. And originally, this book was going to be called The Imagineering Toolbox, and it was going to include both the pyramid and the process. But in writing it, I quickly realized I wasn't going to be able to fit it all in one reasonably sized book. I was going to have to really trim things down and sort of give short shrift to some things. I didn't want to do that, so I contacted my publisher and I said, hey, the book is getting kind of long already, and I haven't even got to the process yet. Could we cut that out and do a separate book? He said, sure, that would be great. So the Imagineering Pyramid was published in 2016. The Imagineering Process, again, was May of this year. And so while that was the principles, this explores the process that they go through when they say, hey, we need a new ride in Fantasyland, or we need a new ride in Animal Kingdom, or whatever. So we're going to explore that in this. That's what we're going to talk about. We'll talk right through the process. We'll talk about how they apply the process, how the Imagineers use the process, the questions they ask, the things they do, and then talk about at each stage how that might apply to another field, how you might use that in the real world, or beyond the berm is the phrase I like to use. So the berm is that earthen barrier that surrounds the parks that Walt Disney originally included very deliberately to keep out the outside world. He didn't want people at Disneyland to be distracted by traffic and other stuff. He wanted to keep it very isolated. So there's this big berm. So I use the phrase beyond the berm to talk about taking these ideas outside of the parks. So let's just dig right in. So the first thing we have to talk about is, what is Imagineering? So Imagineering, according to Walt Disney, is the blending of creative imagination and technical know-how. And this is, technically the word is what's called a portmanteau, which combines imagination and engineering, but that's kind of flat. Walt Disney used the term, this definition I just talked about, creative imagination and technical know-how, in the Disneyland TV show and other places to sort of explain what it is they do when they developed Disneyland. And he used that TV show to actually promote Disneyland. He worked out a deal with ABC where they helped pay for the park, and he gave them television programming in the form of this Disneyland TV show where he could do specials and excerpts about building the park, and it continued for a long time. And that's sort of where people first started to learn about this Imagineering thing, though the company was not called that then. The company then was called WED Enterprises, which WED stands for Walt Elias Disney. That was a company that he set up with his own money to do his own thing when he first decided to build Disneyland. Years later, the Disney company bought it, and then when Michael Eisner got involved in the 80s, he actually had the name changed officially to Walt Disney Imagineering. Little sidebar, but still interesting if you're as fascinated by this stuff as I am. So let's look at this process. And I gave everybody a business card. I know it's small, but that's a little picture of the process that we're going to talk about. And it's also on the cover, but I don't know if you all have one. So it starts with what I call the prologue. So story is very important in Imagineering and in Disney. Everything they do has something to do with story. They like to tell a story. So I use the story metaphor in the process with the prologue and epilogue. So that's why these names are all my names, incidentally. I'll make note of what the Imagineers call some of these things. So we start with the prologue. The process starts there, and that's about needs and requirements and constraints. And so this is when somebody says, either in operations or somebody at the creative level or whatever, we need a new ride in this place. So for instance, Animal Kingdom opens up in 1998, pretty incomplete relative to what you see now. The Asia land particularly was almost non-existent. But even after they developed things, really the only thrill ride was Countdown to Extinction, which is now called Dinosaur. And Cali River Rapids was somewhat thrill, but not really. And somebody, I'm not even sure who, said, Animal Kingdom needs a thrill ride. So that's where we start. We start with a need of some sort. Now it can be operational. Again, it could be, we need a new gift shop. We need some more. A few years ago, they expanded Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World to include New Fantasyland. And that was, we need more capacity in Fantasyland and Magic Kingdom. So they identify a need. Now, a need could be a want or a desire. We want more space. We want to do this, whatever. So they identify their need, but then along with it, they talk about and they identify their requirements and their constraints. So it's not enough to say we need a thrill ride in Animal Kingdom. We need a thrill ride in Animal Kingdom that fits within the Asia land. That might be a creative requirement. We need one that can have an hourly capacity of 1,500 people, because we just know operationally we need to make sure we can flow 1,500 people through a day, an hour, so that absorbs 1,500 people from the park capacity once an hour. So there could be operational requirements, creative requirements, whatever. And then there's constraints. So what we can think about it is the need is what you have to do, the requirements are what you have to do with it, and the constraints are what you can't do. And so those are, you can only spend $10 million. Never enough now. You can only spend $100 million. You have to have it done in 3 years. Any number of constraints. Now, in some cases, those constraints can be physical ones. For instance, at Magic Kingdom, the space currently occupied by Stitch's Great Escape has been 4 different things. It started out as Mission to the Moon, or Flight to the Moon, when the park opened. But shortly after the park opened, we'd stopped going to the moon, so that sort of stopped being kind of appropriate. Then it became Mission to Mars, or Flight to Mars. I can't remember exactly the name. And then that, had some interest, and then the interest level sort of waned. Then it became the Alien Extraterrestrial Encounter, which was loosely based on the Aliens films, just without the licensing, which was at one point deemed a little bit too scary, actually, for Magic Kingdom. And then that was since being turned into Stitch's Great Escape. Now, the interesting thing about this is one of the constraints of this, so the requirement and the need was we need to replace Mission to Moon, the Flight to the Moon, because it's 1975 and we stopped going to the moon in 1972. And we're not going again, so that's just not going to work anymore. So we need to require, and we need, the requirement might be it needs to fit into Tomorrowland. But this building is pretty central to the whole Tomorrowland landscape. We can't tear it down, so you got to do it within the structure of the building that we have, which is a few pre-show areas, a few corridors, and a big theater in the round. So that's a constraint of a different kind, which is you have to do this ride and it has to fit inside this particular space. Another example of a constraint like that is happened more recently when Maelstrom in the Nori Pavilion in Epcot was replaced with Frozen Ever After. They did not gut the whole place. They actually reused the ride track the way it is, including the part where the boat goes backwards and then goes down the lift and all that other stuff. So they had physical constraints of the facility. So if we look at beyond the berm, these are the same types of things when we have a project we need to do. So you guys are in college, you get a term paper. You need to write a term paper about Tom Sawyer or Mark Twain or Moby Dick or hopefully something better than those, but right, you need to write a term paper. You have to do a research project about something. You're going to school, right? So I'm sure you have the same thing. So we're given a need, and the requirements are you have to have it by a certain date. You have to 3.5 typed pages, double spaced, whatever, this font can't be 14 point, it has to be 10 point, whatever the details are. And then the constraints, again, sort of tell you what you can and can't do. You can't use Wikipedia for your sources or whatever it might be. So these kind of things apply, this whole process works in both inside and outside the parks. Now, one of the things that happens in some projects, particularly in a business setting, is somebody will say, we need to do X, when really X is just the symptom. So we need to do a thing because XYZ is happening. But XYZ is sort of a symptom of a deeper problem. So one of the important things in this step is to really drill down deep and find out what is my real need. Like, for instance, if in a business process, there's people who are not all on the same page about what's happening about a certain project or a particular business operation. Somebody says, we need to schedule a meeting once a week so everybody's on board. Well, no, you don't need a meeting. You need a way to make sure everybody is communicated with on a consistent basis. So a lot of times the surface need is not really the need that you will end up with. If you drill deep enough, you may find something a little bit different. And the same with requirements and constraints. And in some cases, requirements and constraints could be thought of as two sides of the same coin, right? Has to be 3 pages, can't be less than 3 pages, right, in terms of a paper. So that's where we start with this need and the requirements and constraints. So then the Imagineers move on to the first step, and so that's this first block, and then we move into the middle tier, which is the main parts of the process. We move into what's called blue sky. And this is one of the things that is pretty well promoted online. They talk about blue sky, the sky's the limit. And it's true, but it's just the first step of a much bigger process. And so blue sky is where they brainstorm and come up with initial ideas for how we're going to meet this need and how we're going to address the requirements and constraints. Now, the truth is they actually focus on the requirements and constraints much more later as they get into the process, because while they may have identified them, they may not have actually figured out how they're going to address them in their initial vision. So the goal of the blue sky stage is to create a vision for how you're going to meet your need with enough detail to convince somebody else, your boss, the people paying for the project, your teacher, that yes, I should continue. Yes, it's a viable idea enough to want to pursue. And so there's 2 parts to the blue sky process. And they are brainstorming and concept design. So brainstorming is the part that we hear about a lot with brainstorming or blue sky. They go in a room and there's no such thing as a bad idea. There's 4 rules. There's no such thing as a bad idea. We don't say no. There's no blocking. You never tell somebody this, and then there's no such thing as a bad idea. They really treat that 4th one seriously, because if you tell somebody that's a bad idea, they're going to shut down and not contribute anymore, and the next idea they might have given you could have been the one that answers your problem. So they really try to do that a lot. Now, the Imagineers actually use another process which is outlined in this book by a former Imagineer, C. McNair Wilson. This book is called Hatch, and he has what he calls the 7 agreements of brainstorming. And 4 of them very much align with the 4 rules that Imagineering uses. But this also starts with, tell everybody what you're going to talk about. So start a fire. Tell them we're going to brainstorm about a new ride in Asia, just so they have some context. There's no blocking. Again, some of the same rules. There's no bad ideas. There's no blocking. You can always generate a few more ideas if you just keep trying. Wild ideas are okay. Don't be conservative. Go crazy. We'll figure, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but better start wild and go back down. And then the last of his 7, and I don't think I went through all 7, is critical thinking, which is about taking this vast group of ideas that you have and then grouping them, grabbing one, grouping them with others that might be similar, and then growing that again, and perhaps doing more brainstorming to add more to that. And you continue to do this until you sort of finally narrow down and figure out, okay, this is what we want to do. We want to do a thrill ride on a runaway train that goes through the Himalayan mountains, and you end up face to face with the Yeti. That's what we want to do. But that idea by itself is not enough. You can't start with that. You can't write that on a whiteboard or send it out in a memo and say, okay, start with the blueprints. There's a lot more before you can get to the blueprints. So that's where concept design and the other half of Blue Sky is. Once they sort of have an idea, then some of the folks start to develop that idea, do some initial development of that idea. And again, the goal of this stage is a vision with enough detail, and just enough detail to convince yourself, your boss, your teacher, your advisor, whoever, to pursue it and continue to the next step. So that's partly concept design. That's where some of the early sketches you may see, if you go online and look at Imagineering, look for Imagineering pictures, you see some early sketches. Most of the work that we see that they promote, particularly when they advertise things, is really concept art from much later in the process. But sometimes you'll see a Blue Sky sketch, and a couple of the books in here I'll show you, or that I'll talk about later, have a lot of Blue Sky concepts. So that's early. So we've identified our vision. We want to build a thrill ride, this runaway train ride through the Himalayas where we run into the Yeti. So now that you've done Blue Sky, the next step is what they call concept development. And actually the Imagineers just call it concept. And that's where we take this idea and we flesh it out to provide enough extra detail so we know what we need to build and we know what we need to design. Because again, if we start with, even with some concept sketches, runaway train, run into the Yeti, it's not enough to do blueprints and to do layouts and all the technical work they need to do to build this thing. They can't start pouring concrete based on a sentence or two or a sketch or two. So then they do concept development. This is where they really flesh things out. And this is where they start to do a lot of research too. So in the case of Expedition Everest, that's the ride I'm talking about, by the way, when I keep talking about this example in case. They went to the Himalayas and to Tibet several times. They studied the local culture about the Yeti, they studied the mountains, they studied the look of the buildings and the atmosphere, so they had an idea of what kind of environment they were going to build. And from that, this is where they do a lot of concept drawing, a lot of models, concept paintings, and that, again, the goal of this stage is to flesh this idea out enough so that you know what you need to build. So you know what blueprints you need to do, what technical diagrams they need to design, what sort of lighting we're going to need, all the various pieces, and we'll get to that in the next step, all the various things. So this is where we flesh it out. So if we look at the real world, this is again where, so your teacher says you need to do a research project about cellular mitosis. My daughter's into biology. So you pick a project, right? Well, that's okay, and you're going to do this, and it's going to, I want to do this project about cellular mitosis, and I want to explore this part of it. That's still not enough to start writing, really. So concept development is sort of, okay, well, what are the various topics I might need to touch on? Or what are the various aspects or parts of this that I need to flesh out? So, in the world that I live in, instructional design or training, Blue Sky may say we need to build a class that teaches people how to implement this particular software product. Okay, that's nice, but that you can't write an outline, you can't start writing exercises yet. So in concept development, you might say, well, what are the things we need to teach them? We need to teach them how to install it. We need to teach them how to configure it. We need to teach them how to set up the data that's used. So all those pieces might be lessons or little parts of the course or whatever. So the goal here, again, is to understand all that you have to do. So this is sort of like you have this vision, and then you're like, wow, to make this vision, I have to do all of this. But you need to know what all this is before you can start doing it. So that's part two, that's concept development. So then they move into design, which the Imagineers call schematic. And this is where they start to do the technical design and the real, more, again, technical design aspects. Hello. That includes blueprints, elevations, plans, all sorts of numbers of diagrams, and other technical specifications. So there's, at Imagineering, there's about 140 different disciplines that are part of Imagineering, people that do 140 different types of things. Now, some of them are administrative. They have their own accountants, they have their own project managers, things. But a lot of them are different aspects of design, different types of designers. So they have lighting designers, they have media designers, and media designers do video and audio. They have graphic designers that do the signage and the marquees and things. They have sound designers. They have facility designers, the people that design the actual physical structure that an attraction is going to take place in. They have ride design, ride system and ride vehicle design. And they have show control design. So that says that, okay, so we need a system that somehow when our car's vehicle hits this particular spot, this particular effect happens up in the corner. And, oh, by the way, we need some lights to shine on that and some sound to make the roar. You know, for instance, when we come through this particular part with the Yeti, we needed to roar and reach down and grab us. It doesn't reach down and grab us anymore. We talk about that another time if we want. But so this is the design stages where they do all of this different work. And again, this is where a lot of these different disciplines that you'll hear about come into play. So they do, you know, blueprints, schematics, elevations, which are sort of like an elevation is a frontal look at something without perspective that you would normally see, so that you can see exactly how much, you know, how long is the wall, how tall is the thing, you know, it's very detailed. They might do, and there's different types of elevations, so there'll be color elevations and different things that are used to identify different parts of the attraction. Another part that reminds me of is color design. They actually have people who are very particular about the colors and the treatments and the wall treatments. And one of the things that will come out of this are color boards, what they call color boards. So there'll be swatches of paint that says, this is the interior wall. Hello, hey, how are you? Old friend. So they'll do swatches. This is the interior paint. This is this wall. This is this. These are the different types of wallpaper, et cetera. So from this, at this stage, this is where most of the documents that they're going to need to actually build this attraction come from. So this is where a lot of time happens. And again, this is where most of the different types of people sort of get involved in this design stage. Now, in our real world project, right, this is where, like in your research paper, this is where you might start writing actually and start doing your research and gathering your information. If we were building a training course, this is where you're actually detailed outlines, like, so we're gonna have 5 slides that explain this concept, then we're gonna have an exercise. We're gonna have 12 slides and an exercise. And the exercises are gonna build on each other so that over time we build all the data that we need so that by the end we can actually process a bill. I work in the utility industry and billing is one of the things we do, so I might default to that once or twice. So that's design. So now the next step is construction. This is when they actually build it. And so now, the model, the process diagram is the ideal world. Really, these things are not happening exactly one after the other. Once they have an idea of what they're going to build, they might start construction. So there's some overlap. But once they start construction, that's when they start to build the facility and or fabricate all the pieces that will go into it, as well as to start to assemble it all. So, and depending on the nature of the project, this could be different types of things. If they're going to build on, you know, brand new ground, this is that part where they move dirt around for a while. You know, any construction project, like for months, they just seem to move the piles of dirt around, and then all of a sudden the building shows up, right? So they do some of that. They also have to fabricate the pieces. So if it's Expedition Everest, for instance, so they had to do the land preparation, start to pour the concrete. They had to also fabricate the track, and then put it together in the right order. Like they couldn't build the whole mountain and then move the track in. They actually had to lay some concrete, put some track in, put some structural steel, put some more track in, put some more structural steel to make sure it all worked properly. So they have to fabricate that. They have to fabricate the ride vehicles themselves, the props, the animatronics, all the pieces that they figured out that they want to do in the design stage. Now is when they have to put them together, create them, put them together, and assemble them, and finally build it. And so that is one of the ones that we watched, for years. If you go to Disney World multiple times, you see over the construction wall. Like right now, if you go, you see over the construction wall, you see Star Wars Land going up at Hollywood Studios, and you go for 2 or 3 years and you see it, and it's just very taunting. Like, I don't want to wait 3 years to go in there, but it's how long it takes. So in the real world, this is where you're actually building whatever it is you're going to build. You're going to write your research paper or edit your research paper. You're going to produce your training materials. If it's a recorded class, you might do your recordings, all the various pieces. And again, part of this is building the pieces that will be used to build your whole project. So that's construction. So now we get into models. So now in the diagram, models runs across the bottom, because models is something they use at every stage along the way. It's not the next stage, it's a tool they use at each stage. And I needed a way to graphically represent that, and I tried a couple different things, and this was the best one I could come up with. So they use models to help them test their ideas and identify problems that may come up later. And so one of the other tools they use are prototypes. And so, one of the very popular trends in business is this idea of design thinking that comes out now, and that's very much about prototyping. You come up with an idea, you prototype, you test, and you see whether it works, and then you iterate back again, and you do some more. So at each stage, they use models. So at Blue Sky, they might do these what they're called massing models in architecture, which are chunks of foam or cardboard that just show the building will look like this and the mountain will look like this, and just so they have a rough idea of what things will look like. As they get to concept development, they'll do more detailed models that get into greater detail, different scales. So they do models of multiple different scales and sizes and types to sort of solve their design problems and understand it. And Walt, this goes back to Walt, he was a very big proponent of models, because he used to say, I don't remember the exact quote, but pictures lie, models tell the truth. Like, a picture doesn't show you the details, but if you have a model and you can actually look around the other side, you're like, well, what's going to be there, And so, for instance, in doing Expedition Everest, in designing that, the numbers I've heard range from 24 to 27 different models that they built to design this, anywhere from this rough thing to a giant half-inch to a foot scale model that they built of the attraction exactly the way it was going to be built. So not only did they use these to solve their problems, but they use them in different ways. And one of the ways they use it, particularly this giant model, is they actually scan it. They have a scanner, and they scan it using software. And then for the mountain in particular, they have a system that breaks up this surface into 6 foot by 6 foot, what they call chips. And they have a proprietary machine that bends rebar and welds it together into these 6 foot by 6 foot chips and puts wire mesh over them. So by the end, they have this big pile of these chips, which are the skin of the mountain of Expedition Everest. And when they get there, the structural steel's in place, they like a giant Lego set. Yeah?
When you say they have this proprietary machine, is that Disney itself that has that?
Yeah, Imagineering has a proprietary machine that they, and I assume they have 2 actually. They probably have one in Florida and one in California. But it might just be in California, and they might ship stuff. It's hard to know. But yeah, if I say they, it means Disney. Sorry, I should probably clarify. But so they literally put these places and then spread concrete and then start doing their sculpting. So that's one of the ways they use models. Another type of model that they use that is fascinating to me is what they call a building information model. So originally, the Imagineers did all this on paper. So they would do blueprints, and they would do schematics, they'd do elevations and all this on paper, and they would get on the field, and they would build the structure, and then the show people would come with their sets, and they would say, oh darn, look, this piece of structural steel is 6 inches too long in this place. I either need to change my show scene, or I gotta change the structural steel. Hopefully it's not too important to the structure of the building. And so that's costly, because they get to the field, they're ready to install, and they have to stop and redo things. with this building information model, all these diagrams and pieces are done in software, in CAD and things. And I think there's a tool now, the one they mainly use is called Revit, which is this building information model. And they put all these pieces together, and they can layer the facility diagrams and the show diagrams and the lighting and the HVAC and all these pieces to see how they work. And they can detect clashes in the model before they get to the field, so they can identify it. So for you three particular, anyone would want to see this, but since you guys are going to be presenting and putting something, so they're going to be doing, they're working on a project called Imaginations, which is a contest that Disney runs. There's a video that came out a few years ago, well, maybe quite a few years ago now, but NASA did a technology summit, and they invited a vice president of Imagineering to present about how they use technology. His name is Jack Blitch, and he, it's in my, I think I reference it in the bibliography of both books. He does a video demonstration showing this building information model and showing the clash detection when they built Voyage of the Little Mermaid. They could, so originally, I don't know if the clash happened for real or if they built it for the demo of this video, but he shows how they use these various tools and how they use this building information model. So they use it for that. The other thing they use it for is to sort of lay out how a project is going to be built over time. So they can actually say, you know, at each day, how much progress are we going to make? So in 3 months, they can estimate we will be at this point, we'll have so they can order parts and supplies just in time. So they don't need 12,000 bags of concrete sitting there for 3 years. They order the 300 they need at a time based on their needs. So, and they can do the same thing with cost. They can time it out over time and say, okay, at the end of our first year, if we're building for 3 years, at the end of our first year, it's going to cost us $50 million. By the end of our second year, it's going to cost us another $35 million, or whatever the details are. So they use models at all stages across, of different types. Even at construction, they use models. A good example of that is when they did the Tree of Life. When they were sculpting and designing the Tree of Life, there was scaffolding all around it that the sculptors needed to be able to do their sculpting. But that meant they were so close they couldn't see the whole tree. So they actually had a detailed model on site that they could go then look at to sort of get some perspective on what they were doing. Other types of models they use are, again, prototypes. So who has ever been on Toy Story Mania? No? Okay, so it's a shoot 'em game. Like basically you're in this car and you have this gun and it's a little string, and basically it's like midway games, like ring toss or darts or whatever, but the gun kind of does it all. When they first built it, their first prototype was a pair of chairs and a couple cardboard paper towel tubes, just to get an idea of what it would be. And then they built a wood prototype of the car. They went through like 3 or 4 different types of guns, of the shooters, 3 or 4 different types of triggers. So they kept prototyping and playtesting. Another really good resource about models is there's a DVD series called The Science of Disney Imagineering that teaches scientific principles, magnetism, electricity, etc., through the eyes of Imagineering and ride design. And one of them is called Design and Models, that takes you through their design process and a detailed look at models. That's also in the bibliography because one of the ones I own. I have a pretty extensive library. So now we've identified a need, we've come up with a vision, we want to thrill ride through Everest where we run into the Yeti, we've fleshed that out and we've decided, so it's going to be in a village called Zirkazong, and we're going to be on an old tea train, and it used to be a tea plantation that got shut down because the Yeti, well, it was a bad place, but we want to offer them the trip to get to Everest, but we have to cross the Forbidden Mountain. And so then they've designed it all, they've built it all, and they've used models along the way. Now it's time to open it. And so we get to the epilogue of the process. And again, using my story metaphor, the epilogue is openings, evaluations, and show quality standards. And so openings are when they open and present an attraction to an audience. And they have a number of different openings. So if you're an annual pass holder, they may have annual pass holder previews, so you get to go because you pay so much and you go, often we'll give you a treat. If you're a cast member, you get to go as a preview. The press gets special openings. Sometimes there's a soft opening, which is sort of a surprise. If you happen to be at the park at the right time, you get to ride this thing. I was just at Disney World in June, and Toy Story Land was opening at Hollywood Studios. Literally, our trip was June 21st to the 28th. It was opening on the 30th. And so every day we were at Hollywood Studios, I'd run over and like, any chance, any chance, any chance? And like, no, you can't, stop coming back. They didn't really say that. They would never say that. But so there's a bunch of different openings, eventually leading to a grand opening. And usually that's a press event. They have press folks. Usually an executive or two are there saying something. At this case, in the Toy Story opening, Tim Allen and Tom Hanks, I think, were both there. At least Tim Allen. I think Tom Hanks too. So that's a big deal. So then it's open to the public, and then their guests can start to use it. And one of the reasons they do these staged openings is to allow them to sort of start to operate it for real audiences, but not thousands of real people at a time. Like if they keep it to a cast member preview, they can say only 500 cast members can come into this area for now, so they can do it under sort of controlled circumstances to do some testing. Which actually reminds me of another piece in the construction phase, so I'm going to step back just for a sec. Part of the construction is a thing they call test and adjust. And that's where they test and adjust. And so they actually do some run testing and tweaking. My family and I, a few years ago, went to lunch with an Imagineer at Disney World, where we actually get to have a private lunch, 8 people and an Imagineer. It was great. And he told us a story about he worked on an attraction called Crush and Gusher at Typhoon Lagoon. I've never been to the water parks at Disney World. I can go to water park here. I can't go to Magic Kingdom here, so I'm going to spend my time what I can't do there. But they have this ride. This Crush and Gusher had 3 different tubes, if you will, 3 parts: banana blaster, orange, and they were named after fruits. And they were originally designed to have 2 people each. But during testing and adjusting, one of the lifeguards said, hey, what if we had a raft with 3? Wouldn't that be kind of fun? So they tried it, and it turned out it was a lot of fun. But the way that the tube sort of bent and turned, for one of them, the 3-person raft got stuck, and it didn't work. So they said, these 2 will support 2 or 3 riders. This one will support only 2 riders. But this was like just before opening, so they had to change their signage. They had to, and one of the other things that they sort of figure out along the way is what they call theoretical hourly ride capacity. How many people, in theory, can be on this attraction at any one time? Which I don't think any ride ever reaches its theoretical hourly ride capacity, because that would be a perfect, what they call spill and fill. When you get there and you get off the ride and they fill in, they call it spill and fill. Those never go quite as smooth as they probably want it to. But the capacity that they want determines how long the queue is, how much interior queue space there is, how much exterior queue space there is, all those things. So when they changed from 2 to 3 riders for 2 of the 2, it increased the capacity of the ride by 30%. So they had to rethink some of their queue space and their signage and some of the things. So again, this is sort of, they also do this testing during these previews and the openings. So once the attractions open, then they get into evaluations. And this is where they start to study, how well did it work? How well did it meet its original creative intent? So one of the things, I didn't get into it, but one of the couple of things that you really focus on in the Blue Sky stage are, what is our story? What is the story we're telling? What is our subject matter? But also, what's the creative intent? What is the experience we want our audience to have when they ride on this attraction? And in our real world, example, if we look at that training example, what is the experience I want a student to have when they go through this training or take this class? Or what is the experience I want my teacher to have when he reads my research paper about cellular mitosis, right? Whatever it might be. So they evaluate, how well did that work? And they evaluate operations. How often did the ride go down, what they call 101? So if you're ever at Disney World and you hear a cast member say something is 101, that means it's not working. So like Pirates is 101, that means it's shut down and all the people are getting evacuated off or whatever. So they evaluate its success. How well did it meet our need? Did it meet our need? Did it meet our requirements? Did it violate any of our constraints? Does it meet our creative intent? Is it continuing to meet our creative intent? And then show quality standards is a team of Imagineers whose job it is to go out to the parks and evaluate how well things still are. Like I'm a writer and I would say how well things are. Evaluate how things are in terms of, are they still meeting their creative intent? Do they look worn down? Like, hey, I think we need to shut this down for a week and paint it again, or, you know, there's some safety issues, like a restraint isn't working right, or whatever. So Show Quality Standards is this team that literally continually evaluates things. And what this diagram doesn't show is really there's a feedback loop that comes back here, right? So they will say, you know what, Ellen's Energy Adventure is not really doing what it used to do. It's just not, University of Energy and Ellen's Energy Adventure is just not drawing the people it needs to. It's this huge building, and 700 people a day use it. We could make much better use of this. So, you know what, we should close that, and we should instead turn it into a Guardians of the Galaxy attraction, which is, by the way, what's happening right now. They're building and it's a huge, the building for the roller coaster is enormous. You can see it, it's giant. So anyway, Show Quality Standards is that. So there's this feedback loop from here that comes back, and it identifies new needs, new requirements, and new constraints. So there's this sort of continuous loop. And again, in the real world, you know, if you're doing a term paper, your evaluation might be the grade you get. Hopefully there's a little more to it than that. But if you're doing a training program, you may want to evaluate year to year whether or not you want to update your training. One of the things I have to do as my job is update training year to year to address new functionality and features. Or one thing they love to do is change the user interface and the software we work on. So if I have a training class with 1,000 screenshots, I have to take 1,000 new screenshots to replace them all. So that's the process. So anybody have any questions before we move on? And I take a drink of water before I go too hoarse.
Sorry, I missed the very beginning because, well, I had to wait for my wife to get back to watch our kids, but
Important enough.
I missed your introduction, so
Okay.
possibly you could just tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Lou Prosperi, and I'm the author of this book, as well as this one. This is I'll tell you more about me than that. I work currently as a technical writer and a manager of a team of technical writers for Oracle, for a small business unit at Oracle. But I've been fascinated with Imagineering since I went to Disney World the first time on my honeymoon. And over the years, I've amassed a pretty large collection of books, and I've gone 9 or 10 times. Interesting, whenever I get there, I never stop and do the research I want to do. I'm just too busy. I got to get on my next ride, and way too in the moment. And so the genesis of these is I think that there's a creative aspect to most things that we do. Most jobs have an aspect of creativity, or should. You know, there was a survey of CEOs a few years ago of what is the trait that you value the most, you think is most important, and creativity came at the top of the list. And you hear creativity, innovation, these are business terms that are so important. But what no one tells you is how to be creative. They just say, be creative, go. And you can find lots of books about how to have more creative ideas. But the truth is, ideas are only so good. They only get you so far. In fact, I have a belief that's in this book, what I call the idea paradox, which is that ideas are, at the same time, the least important and most important part of any project. And they're the most important part because without an idea, you've got nothing, right? I mean, you need an idea to do what you're going to do. But they're the least important part because ideas are easy. If you talk to creative people, they never say, I never have any ideas of what to do. What they'll tell you is, I don't have enough time to work on all the ideas I have. And just because you have an idea to build a roller coaster thrill ride that's through the Himalayas where you run into the Yeti, how to take that idea and execute it and turn it into something real is not easy either. And so what is not so prevalent, I think, in the business literature and creativity literature is a model or an example of how does creativity work and who's doing it. And so one of the goals I have in these books is to portray a model, present a model using Walt Disney Imagineering as the source, because I can't think of a better example of creativity that touches so many different fields in so many different ways And there's just lots and lots of lessons there. And the goal of these books is not just to talk about the Disney side, but also how these principles apply in the real world, right? And so the first book, for instance, The Imagineering Period, looks at these 15 principles, and for each, what they do in the parks. So what does theming mean in a theme park, right? So theming is about the details they use and the materials they use, so this immersive experience that you were talking about earlier, right? In the real world, theming might be just about paying enough attention to the details that you use to communicate your message. And consistency. Like if you've ever sat through, I don't know what you do for work, but if you've ever sat through a business training, right? And you go through slide after slide after slide, aside from the monotony of that, hopefully, usually slides and that stuff has a template, right? But if you've ever watched, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I've been in a training where the slides were okay, but all of a sudden, there was like 2 extra fonts on the slide. Like the heading was one font, the body text was another, and all of a sudden there was this box with this other font. And it just hit me like, well, why is that way? Because details draw attention to themselves, right? And so theming in that world is being careful about the details and consistent application of, say, templates and colors and fonts and stuff like that, so as to not draw attention from your subject matter. Because in the middle of that training, I stopped paying attention to what he was talking about and wondered, why did that happen? And I'm sure it was a mistake. I'm sure it was an oversight. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in what we do, we don't even notice that kind of stuff. And I pointed out to him, too. I said, I let him finish, but I said, why is that font different? And he didn't have an answer. You know, I apologize. I didn't want to disrupt the training. You know, I like, stop! I didn't do that or anything, but. So does that help? Give you some context?
Yeah, because I wasn't sure if you were from Disney.
No, I only wish. I only wish. No, but I've just done a lot of research. I've talked to some Imagineers. I did this lunch with an Imagineer. And I've read a lot, quite a bit. So these books, I'm going to talk about these a little later. These are called Imagineering Field Guides. They're little pocket books about each of the parks. And each page, if you go like, you know, so this is the Emporium on Main Street, USA. Details about the Emporium, for example. These are a great source, and their size sort of belies their use, right? It looks like, hey, stick it in your pocket. It's like one of those things you buy at the park just as a tour book, right? But they're a treasure trove of information about Imagineering, how they do their jobs. But they don't have indexes. So when I was writing these books, if I wanted to say, where are all the examples of theming or kinetics, I didn't have an answer. So I actually indexed them all. I went through page by page, capturing all of them, and I built an index of each book, and then I put them together in a master index, so that when I was working on the theming chapter, I could go to my index and say, okay, here's the 7 different places they specifically talk about theming. So I've read a little bit about this. So yeah, I'm not from Disney, and there are times when I suffer from imposter syndrome, often. But the good news is I've had Imagineers read both books and provide blurbs about them. And the feedback is, yes, you got it right, which was kind of encouraging. You know, I wouldn't be here, believe me, I wouldn't be here talking about it if the feedback I got from this one was, you just are completely wrong. I would have pulled it down from Amazon and stopped. But the good news is that didn't happen. So does that help? Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Sure.
What do you think of enhancements like Mickey's Halloween, not so scary party, and like they have 2 months of enhancements and take them down? You know, like Teacups have some special lighting and soundtrack. Pirates has some live actors, things like that. What do you think of that?
Well, I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate more, particularly after writing the second book, is this whole idea of needs and requirements and constraints. So whenever I see an announcement about we're going to replace Maelstrom with Frozen Ever After, I try to step back and say, why are they really doing this? So when they announce something like this, like Guardians of the Galaxy taking over Ellen's Energy Adventure, You know, the outcry goes across the internet. Oh my God, they just want to stick Marvel in the parks, and Guardians is the only one they could do east of the Mississippi. I don't know if you know this, but because of Universal has Superhero Island and Marvel, Universal has a license with Marvel that no other theme park can have Marvel branded characters east of the Mississippi. So Disney World can't have a Spider-Man ride or any of that stuff. But Guardians of the Galaxy is not branded Marvel the same way, so they can do that. So the outcry is, oh my God, they want to stick Marvel in the pan. I think there's more to it than that. I'm not convinced it's such a simple, you know, when you're talking about spending hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't just do it, well, we need Guardians in the, you know, there's a need there. There's an operational need. And I think, like I hinted at before, that Ellen's Energy Adventure is more than 700 people a day, but probably not much more than 7,000 people a day. And it's just a lot of valuable real estate sitting there empty when it could be doing something else. In terms of the ticket events like Not So Scary Halloween and Very Merry Christmas and some of that, I think it's fine as long as it doesn't interfere otherwise. I mean, yes, they kick the other people out of the park for some of those events, but it's okay. It's another way to keep it more immersive. You know, one of the interesting things about like the difference between Disney World and Disneyland does a whole lot more of that stuff because the audience mix is different. Disneyland is mostly locals. Like a lot of the audience at Disneyland are local folks. And so they do a lot more, like they changed Haunted Mansion. They put a Nightmare Before Christmas overlay on Haunted Mansion at Christmas. At Disney World, a bigger percentage of their audience are one-time visitors or, you know, every 3 or 4 year visitors. So it's more static in general. So I don't know how responsive that is to your question, but okay, well, yeah, well, that's good. So now we've looked at the process and mostly from the Disney point of view. I have a couple other examples. Actually, before that, I want to talk one more thing, a little bit more about the process. So if you look at this process, it looks kind of fixed. Like they have a need, then they blue sky, they develop, they design, and they construct. The world is not that simple, and the path from concept from need to opening is not a straight line usually. So there's a couple different ways that this model, this process model can be adapted. And this is a vast simplification of the real process that they use. See if I can find it. I should have printed a copy, but I forgot. The real process they use on this page, I don't know if you can see this diagram. Even from there, you can probably see how busy it is. There's like 5 or 6 phases, 7 different tracks, dozens and dozens of milestones along the way. That is from the Themed Entertainment Association, their standard themed attraction design process diagram. There's no way anyone could remember that. So I wanted to distill this down into 7 pieces that people could remember, trying to use one of the principles for my first book, which is readability, right? Simplifying complex subjects. But this process is also adaptable and flexible. One size does not fit all, because you know sometimes a project is build a new restaurant or build a new gift shop. Sometimes it's build Pandora, the world of Avatar. Though the same process will not apply to both of those things, right? So the process is very, very flexible. So the first thing about it is it's very rare, and this certainly applies in the real world too, that you will go from your vision, you'll flesh it out, you'll do your design, you'll build it, and we'll be happy. More often than that, you need to go back and forth. And so the process is very iterative. So this is sort of a blow up of the diagram. So you start at blue sky and you move to concept and you're like, we're not quite there. We go back to blue sky. And we go from concept to design, we're not quite there. We might go back to development. We might go back to blue sky. So it's very iterative. They go back and forth. Now they do a little less of this than they used to. Now with this building information model, sort of helps them solve some of the problems, but it's still something they have to do over time. The other thing is, one way to look at this design stage is macro versus micro. So at the big stage, we're going to design Expedition Everest. But again, that means somebody's got to design the ride system, somebody's got to design the ride vehicle, somebody's got to design the lighting, the sound, the props, the theming, the this, the that, the whatever. And so each of those things might be thought of as its own little miniature version of the process. So that sort of looks, and I know these didn't print out great, sort of like this, where you have blue sky and concept, and then as you come out of concept, your design stage is really a bunch of mini versions of the process. Because what will happen is, when they're finished with concept development, here's all these, text treatments and illustrations and diagrams for what Expedition Everest is. So then, say, the graphic designers say, okay, well, what signage do we need? So even though at concept development, they don't write a list of graphic design needs, the output of concept development includes in it a bunch of implicit needs of things they need for signs, marquees, warnings, whatever it is. So the graphic designers go through it all and say, we need to build this sign, we need to build this sign, we need to build this graphic, we need to do that. And then they brainstorm how to do it, they flesh out their designs, they design and then they build, and then they add to the construction. So it works at this sort of macro and micro level. The other thing that the diagram sort of doesn't convey is that not all the stages are created equally. Sometimes blue sky will take years. Sometimes it'll take a week. I don't know if it's a week, but sometimes it'll take years. Literally, like, has anyone ever been on Soarin'? Right? So Soarin' stayed in blue sky for a long, long time because they had this idea of what they wanted to do, but technically figuring out how to make it feasible. So feasibility is one of the other things that I sort of gloss over it. There's a lot more detail in the book, obviously. I'm not going to talk about that many pages. But the feasibility of how we're going to build this thing so that people can have this experience of soaring over California, which is what it originally was. And it wasn't until an Imagineer named Mark Sumner went home and played with his erector set and had an idea and played with an erector set and built a little erector set model of what it could be like with the chairs. You know how the mechanism works? He built one of those and brought it in and said, hey, how about this? And effectively, if you look at the model, it's very similar to what they ended up building. So sometimes things will stay in blue sky for a long time. Sometimes concept development will take a long, long time. In some cases, your blue sky work, particularly in the real world, sometimes your blue sky work can be involved enough that you don't need much more concept development. You know what you're going to do. In the case of a term paper, you might not need much more concept development than what you're doing. So the different boxes of the different stages of the process are of different sizes. And then the last piece is, even though I say there's 4 of those main phases, they're really, sometimes they may blur. Like the line between blue sky and concept may blur and it might be one bigger effort. Or your concept development might be so elaborate that you really don't need much more design. Now, in the Imagineering world, they're always going to need blueprints and technical diagrams, but in the real world, in our world, depending on how elaborate you get with your concept development, your design phase may be done. Or in some cases, design and construction may overlap, because if you're writing a book, I consider the writing part of the book the design stage, but there's clearly part of it is construction. Though construction to me is more of the typesetting and the physical assembly of all that. So the process is flexible too. It's not quite as sketched out as this diagram implies. So with that said, I want to talk about a couple examples outside the parks that sort of capture, that I think are kind of interesting, that help illustrate. Now, I'm not going to say that, so one of the examples is the Apollo lunar module. I'm not arguing that the Grumman engineers in 1962 or 63 went over to Disneyland and talked to the Imagineers and said, how did you do this? And they used the same process. But what I am going to say is that the process that they used maps very closely to the Imagineering process. And I'll get through that in a second. But first, I'm going to talk about a birthday party. So my son was turning 8 years old, very into Star Wars, wanted a Star Wars birthday party. Now, his previous birthday parties, we had done, he Bob the Builder and other things, and we had done scavenger hunts. So my wife, we got foam and we cut out tools and we built a little fun scavenger hunt, and they all had a little like pouch from Home Depot so the kids could run around and grab the tools, and the first one to win got a no prize, really, right? It wasn't anything serious. Because at a kid's birthday party, the kid cannot be the loser. You can't, so anyway. Just in case Nathan didn't win that game. But anyway, so we wanted a Star Wars birthday party. We had a couple activities planned, and the long-range forecast looked like rain. And one of the activities was going to be lightsaber dueling, right? So we had some toy lightsabers. They could have some duels, not hurt each other. But if it was going to rain, our garage wasn't that great for this, and we were not going to have 8-year-olds in our house swinging lightsabers in the kitchen. It's not going to happen. So we started to think about, well, what can we do instead? And then when I worked as a game designer, one of the things that we did at lunch is we would go to Toys R Us and buy toys to decorate our office space. So I had action figures, and at that time, this was in the mid-90s, there was a line of toys called Micro Machines. I don't know if they're still around, but there was these Star Wars Micro Machines. So you could get little versions of like X-Wings, TIE Fighters, and all the Star Wars ships, and I had a whole fleet. And when I didn't work at the game company anymore, I packed up my stuff and we moved back home. It was up in the attic, and then when Nathan got older, I would get out and like, look, new cool stuff. So I said, all along I thought they'd make a cool game, pieces for a game, but I never had the time to really do it. And now, all of a sudden, I had a need to do it, right? So my need was, I need to come up with an indoor activity for kids that's Star Wars themed that works. So then I said, well, what can we do? Can we do a scavenger hunt? Can we do this? Can we do this? Star Wars Micro Machines. Maybe we can make a game. So I pulled them out, and I ended up deciding, okay, so we're going to build a simple Starship combat game that all the kids can play, that they'll stand around the kitchen table and have this game. And then, so that was my sort of my blue sky, right? And then my concept development, okay, well, can't be a free-for-all because it'll get out of control quick. So I got Empire and Rebellion, so we'll have two teams. And what kind of scenario should we have? Well, the best Star Wars scenario in the world is the original Battle of Yavin and the Death Star. So we'll have a kitchen table. At one corner will be the Death Star. The kids will start at this table. The Rebellion kids will start at this table, and they'll move. And the planet's there. The Death Star starts here, and every turn the Death Star moves 6 inches. And when it gets within 6 inches, it destroys the planet. You guys have to stop it. And so then I figured out game specs for all the ships. So then I moved into design. I sort of figured it out. I worked out game mechanics for all the ships so they could move a certain number of inches. They could shoot a certain number of inches. I built these little strings. I cut out strings with knots or markers at every inch, so they could just put it down and then like sort of move it across the table to see who was in range and how far they could move and where they could move it, etc. So I designed all these ships, and then we tested it a little bit. Nathan and Samantha, his sister, and I, and his mom tested a little bit just to make sure I was still sort of fresh enough out of game design that I was pretty sure it was all going to work. But even, I worked out to hit matrices. So I had figured out numbers like this X-Wing, you need a total of a 10 to hit it. And this TIE Fighter has an attack of 6, so the people have to roll 4, and 2 6-sided dice are better. How often are they going to do that? All that sort of stuff, right? And so then I printed up sheets and built the stuff. And it rained, so we ended up using, even if it was beautiful and sunny, we were going to play this game because I had spent enough time working on it, right? But so we ended up playing it for his birthday, and they had a blast. And later I heard from kids' dads like, "What did you do? My son came home and he couldn't stop talking about this cool game that he played." So that's an example of taking the process, using this process. I had this need. I needed to occupy 10 8-year-olds for an hour. But some of our requirements, right, were it can't be too complicated because they're 8 years old. It also can't be too, I didn't want it to be Candyland either, right? So you've all played Candyland probably, right? It's a game where you make no choice. You make no decisions in the game of Candyland, right? And one of the points of game, like, to quote another author, the essence of gameplay is meaningful choice. Like, when you actually make a choice in a game, it becomes a little bit more than Candyland or Chutes and Ladders or whatever. So I wanted there to be some choice, but I didn't want it to overwhelm them. So I needed to keep it simple enough so I could explain it, simple enough that I could, but elaborate enough so they could, have fun. I could explain it. I could control them around the table. I mean, and so that's a simple example of using this process to sort of go through, to develop a project. The other one I want to talk about, another one is like I said, the Apollo lunar module. So, and yes, we really did go to the moon, right? Yes, we went to the moon several times, last time in 1972. It's a shame that we stopped going, but we talk about politics later. So when they went to the moon, they had ideas about how to get there and how to land. And a couple different ones. One was what they call direct descent. They build a giant rocket and just go to the moon. There's some technical problems with that. Another was what they called Earth Orbit Rendezvous, where they take all the pieces and they launch them in separate things and they put it together in space and then they go and land and do that. And they all sort of hinged on this giant rocket ship thing that would land on the moon and take off. But the moon is far away. It's like far away. And so weight was a big issue. So eventually, the way they decided to go about it was what they call lunar orbit rendezvous. And what they would do is they would take a ship and go to the moon and get in orbit and have a separate ship that would land and then come back and take off from the moon and orbit and rendezvous in lunar orbit and then come back home. And so they needed a ship that could do this. And so they put out an RFP. So their need, NASA's need, was a design for a ship that satisfied the requirements of lunar orbit rendezvous. Lightweight, easy to build. Well, I don't know if easy to build, that's not true. But lightweight, could hold 3 astronauts or 2 astronauts, could land on the moon and take off from the moon, you know, whatever they were. So they put out an RFP, a request for proposal. So that the need, requirements, and constraints represented sort of their RFP, their requirements that they put out there. Grumman Aircraft from New York, which is now Grumman McDonald, I think, I don't remember, and several others put proposals together, and that was their blue sky design, right? Like, we have this list of requirements, here's the design, we think we'll do it. Oh, and by the way, we're a cool company because we've worked with the government. A lot of their answers were program management sort of stuff, like, we'll do reporting and all this sort of technical stuff. Amy, you live in that world. So then Grumman was selected. So then they had to, now, okay, so yes, we'll give you $500 million. Originally the price tag was $500 million. Costed more than $1 billion in the end, but, so now they have to go to concept development. And now Grumman had this sort of methodology, which was their preliminary design stage was where they sort of figured out what they were going to do, which is concept development. So they developed their idea and they worked out a number of different particular issues and things. For example, the original design of the lunar module had seats and giant windows so they could see what they were doing when they're flying. But the windows each weighed like a few hundred pounds, which was a problem because weight was a big constraint, like a giant constraint. So they were shaving off ounces wherever they could. And it wasn't, and they got stuck. Remember I talked about needs and real needs? They thought they needed to sit. But it turns out they didn't need to sit because the moon has 1/6 gravity. So standing worked fine. So it wasn't until one engineer said, well, what if they don't need chairs? What if they stand? We get rid of these windows, we'll have a window this big and they can lean in and they'll be able to see all they need to see to land on the moon. So those are the things that happen in concept development. Once they had figured out that, they went for what they call detailed design, where they did all the drawings, the tens of thousands of drawings that they needed to build the ship. And then they moved to construction, where they actually fabricated, and there's 2 parts to the lunar module. There's the descent stage, which is the part with the legs and the engine that lands, and the ascent stage, which is the crew compartment that sits on top of it. So they built those separately, but they had to work together, and then they had to deal with the systems integration. So there was, life support system, computer system, guidance system, radar system, blah, blah, and they were all built by different groups, and so they had to work together. So that was their construction, and then again, models, they did several different models of the whole overall lunar module, but they did mock-ups of the cockpit and different things. And eventually they flew it in, the first manned one was Apollo 9, in Earth orbit. And then they did Apollo 10, which was the dress rehearsal around the moon. And then Apollo 11 in July of 1969 when we actually landed on the moon. And yes, we landed on the moon. So that's another example. And again, I'm not going to argue, I'm not going to suggest that Grumman went to Disney to figure out how they did this. But I think the process maps pretty closely. And if you're interested in the Apollo program, there's a great miniseries that was on HBO many years ago called From the Earth to the Moon that Tom Hanks produced. And one of the episodes is called Spider, that actually tells this whole story of the lunar module. I've watched it many, many, many times. So we're running long. Who knew? So I have other examples, but I think I'd like to move on to some other stuff. So I brought a couple examples of some books. So if you're interested in Imagineering and more Imagineering, and I know Michael is, for sure, and I assume the three of you are, I just wanted to show off a couple of the books that are in my library that I think are especially valuable if you want to understand more about Imagineering. I mean, aside from these two, these two are good, but if you want to understand what they really do. So this one is one of the first books that was published about it, called Walt Disney Imagineering. It's a coffee table book with lots of gorgeous concept art. Oops. And this is actually, this is a printout of an article of an interview with a legendary Imagineer called John Hench about, it talks about reassurance, and one of the themes that they try to shoot for is reassurance, so that, you know, you go on Splash Mountain and you have this thrill, but then you come back to safety. So, yeah.
I have a question. The people that call themselves the Imagineers,
Mm-hmm.
do they usually go right from the early concept all the way right through to the end, following with all the details and stuff? Or are they more just like coming up with the big ideas and then they pass it on to a lower staff that actually make all the details happen?
So they have people, again, there's like 140 different disciplines within Imagineering. So there's the concept designers who do this blue sky, big picture stuff and concept development, right? But then they have architects and they have lighting designers, electrical engineers, ride engineers. So they do most of it in-house, but they do contract with other groups, particularly for the construction. So, but
I'm just wondering, if you worked for Disney and you actually had a title of Imagineer,
mhm.
are you more of a big picture, or is it everybody?
It's everybody. It's a big organization. It's actually an organization that expands and shrinks depending on what they're doing. Like when they were building Epcot, it was huge, and then Epcot was open, and a month later it became much smaller because they didn't need that many people to keep it going, and they weren't sure what they were going to build next. So that's this book. These two are basically two versions of the same book, Designing Disney, Imagineering, and the Art of the Show, by that same one I mentioned, John Hench. I just brought both in case you're interested to see which one you could find. He was sort of what they would call as like a Renaissance engineer. He read stacks of books in Wheat magazines every week. He was very, very involved. He was all about color too. Like at the end, he was the color guy. And color is one of those areas of detail where they spend a lot of time. Like the, what's it called? The American Adventure. There are 4 different shades of white used on the facade of the American Adventure at different elevations to account for the different ways the sunlight reflects on it. One great story about John Hench and color is when they were building the Living Seas originally at Epcot, the sponsor said, just paint it white. And he said, I have 36 shades of white. Which one would you want, right? White is not enough for me. This book, Walt Disney's Imagineering Legends, is a great book by Jeff Curdy was an Imagineer, actually. And this is sort of biographies of the first generation of Imagineers, starting back with the early guys like Harper Goff, who did the initial designs of Disneyland. Rolly Crump, who's a legendary guy. He worked on the Tiki Room as well as It's a Small World. At the World's Fair, the big giant mobile that was up front, the Tower of the Four Winds, that was his design. So this is, if you want to understand a subject, understanding the people that did it is a valuable piece, and this is a great resource for that. I already talked about these Imagineering field guides, $10 a piece, worth their weight in gold. My wife gets aggravated because every time we go to Disney World, I bring them with me, even though, and actually I was lucky enough to get them all signed by the guy who wrote them all a couple trips ago. I talked about this one, Hatch, which is about brainstorming, which is he's no longer with Imagineering, but it's a great start. And then this is One Little Spark by Marty Sklar. Marty Sklar started working at Disney like a month after Disneyland opened. He worked for a couple years in promotions and PR, and then moved to Imagineering, became a show writer and a producer, and eventually was VP in charge of creative for Imagineering. So he was a very big deal. And then a few years ago, he resigned. He was an ambassador. He still stayed very involved. He just died this last year. But he developed what he calls Mickey's 10 Commandments, which are sort of these 10 guiding principles. This book explores those 10 commandments with examples of where he thinks they did a good job and where they didn't do so good. And it contains a series of essays by Imagineers about how to become an Imagineer. So that's just a sample of that. On my business card, and I'll get you guys copies if you want, I have a website called the Imagineering Toolbox. It's imagineeringtoolbox.wordpress.com. I have links there. I have a Pinterest board with all these books and more, which is where you can find more information about me and what I'm doing. I post little snippets, like sometimes I'll see an example of one of the principles in practice, and I'll write a post like, there's an example of how this principle actually works. And sometimes they're in the parks and sometimes they're not, depending, you know.
Can you just answer one question?
Sure.
Okay.
You need to get me to stop talking, but sure, yeah.
So, can you talk about time constraints? So we talk about blue sky and that can take years, and we have construction, et cetera, and I'm in software, so, you know, there are always time constraints. How does that fit into this?
Well, so they have time constraints as well.
Do they just, okay, you only have 2 years for your blue sky,
Well,
you know.
so it depends, right? So one of the interesting things when talking to Imagineers and asking questions, particularly about the process. So with the first book, The Pyramid, I could, if we were in Magic Kingdom, I could point to you examples of all these, concrete, real-life examples of theming at work, of transitions, of kinetics, et cetera. I can't really point to you to an example of concept development in the park. So I need to do a little more research and sort of as a bit of a scavenger hunt and puzzle. And I would ask Imagineers, particularly Alex Wright, answered a bunch of questions. And the answer often was, it depends. Because, like I said, you know, it looks like a nice straight line, but as soon as they have an idea of what they're going to build, they start tearing up the ground and figuring out, you know, like, he told me a story that in a couple cases, the facility was being built before they knew it was really going to be in it. So there are real world concerns, right? So that story of, you know, the Soarin' Blue Sky taking years, that was before they sort of decided to do it. That's like before they even got the go ahead to do it. Now, there are other times where I suspect that, for instance, the 2019 deadline to open Star Wars Land was not based on thoughtful analysis about how long it would take them to do it. I think it was, you've already had a couple years, this is the line, and get it done, right? Now, the lands are virtually identical in both parks. I mean, they're doing the same thing. I mean, a couple things are going to be different just because of the lay of the land. So I think I know it sounds like a cop-out, but it does depend on whether there are concrete plans in place to do it or not. You know, like Avatar at Animal Kingdom. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's amazing. It's just, wow, it's fantastic. That took, from the time they announced it till it opened, like 7 years. Now, I have a theory that that's because when they announced it, they cut a deal with James Cameron and said, we're going to put Avatar in our parks. We're going to put Avatar in our parks. And then they came over and said, Joe, how are we going to put Avatar in our parks? Figure this out for us. So it took a lot longer than usual. You know, usually you hear something and 3 to 5 years later it's done. That was like closer to 7. And there was quite a while before we saw even models and sketches and stuff. So I suspect it, you know, it depends on how firm where the company is in terms of, we are launching Star Wars in 2019. Be ready.
Where do you stop? So say you are developing a training course. You got to develop that and get it launched in September, or, you know, real world, you got to cut somewhere perhaps, or, you know, do you have any examples, or did the Imagineers ever talk to you about how that happens, what they cut out, or do you know what I mean?
Well, no, they didn't. But there have been plenty of times where the plans that we see initially and what we end up getting are a little different. And I suspect that's part of it, right? So, our initial plans for this were to have 5 rides, and we opened with 3 because we could build 3 in time. Animal Kingdom actually is an excellent example of that. It wasn't just time, it was money, though. By the time they had built the safari and the Tree of Life and most of it, they ran out of money and time to do what they wanted to do. The space that is now Avatar, which was Camp Mickey Minnie before, was originally supposed to be something called Beastly Kingdom, which was about dragons and unicorns and stuff like that. But they ran out of money and ran out of time, so they ended up putting in this campground, and they said maybe we'll get to it, and then they decided to do Everest and the other stuff. So yeah, the real world, obviously, constraints happen. And generally, the projects that we work on are not the scale and scope of what the Imagineers do. And another important part is, so they may have, when they design an attraction, they may have dozens, hundreds of technical diagrams and things. Our projects in the real world are often much, much smaller in scope. Sometimes 2 or 3 outlines will be all we need, right? Or like my notes for this are basically a mind map that I put together, right? That's about as far as I went because I trusted that I knew this stuff well enough, and I can ramble, that I could make it through this without much more detail.
I just thought about something else too.
So, sorry, Ian, I hope I didn't cop out,
No,
but,
that's fine.
okay.
I would imagine too that, all the land that they own and everything, they almost are their own cities, so getting approvals for different things and they want everything to work together.
Right.
They don't want, somebody building
They are,
a residential tower of their own.
right, they actually are their own city. When they bought all the land, they actually created a thing called the Reedy Creek Improvement District, where they are their own government. It's changed lately, but initially they had 10 or 12 citizens who were voters, who all worked for Disney. And so they could create their own zoning and all their own stuff. Right.
If they want it, they build it.
Right. Well, yeah, but they're also very mindful of things. There's a couple cases where you can see stuff. Usually, they're very thoughtful about sight lines, to the point where if you're in Epcot, my son loved pointing this out the last trip. If you're at Epcot and you look at Morocco from across the lagoon, you'll see a building way in the back. That's actually the Tower of Terror from Hollywood Studios. But the back side of Tower of Terror has actually been themed to look like Morocco because they knew people would see it. Yeah. So they're very mindful of that sort of stuff when they can be. For instance, this show building for Guardians of the Galaxy is going to be kind of obtrusive.
They have a timeline on that, so they gotta be like.
Right. Well, so in a couple of years, it's the 50th anniversary. So that's what a lot of things are targeting. Like they're going to put Tron in Magic Kingdom, over behind Space Mountain, behind the Speedway. So there's a whole bunch of projects going on. It's actually a pretty good time to be a Disney fan.
You'd love the Avatar ride.
It's pretty astounding, yeah. Yes.
I just two big just comments on things that I heard. So I saw an article recently on a guy that acquired the when they were doing Beastly Kingdom, but they hadn't really done it yet. And they were like, "Hey, we're gonna do it," but then they didn't. They had some promotional sculptures or something up there that had a unicorn. And there's an article about the guy that actually bought it and has it. He installed it in his yard. And he themes it every holiday and all that. And so I just thought that was kind of.
Yeah, some people are pretty into it. If you actually go to Animal Kingdom and you look at the logo, you'll see a dragon in the logo, which was there because they had originally planned for this Beastly Kingdom part.
They should put a bench in there.
Yeah, well. So we've gone kind of long. I apologize for that. I probably could keep talking, but I want to be respectful of your time. And I should have said at the outfront, and I'm glad I didn't because you guys came in a little bit late. I want to thank you for coming and deciding to spend an hour of your time, well, it turns out an hour and a half, of your time with me. We all have the same amount of time, 168 hours a week. And the fact that you're willing to spend 1 or 2 of them here listening to me talk, I very much appreciate it. So thank you. Thanks for coming. If there's no other questions, we'll call it there. I have copies of the books, both books, if you're interested, and I'm happy to sign them if you care. It doesn't change the value of it. I mean, the value might drop. But thank you all for coming.